12-year-old Albert had learned something most children never have to learn: how to suffer quietly, and with dignity. Before the city even opened its eyes, Albert was already awake, already walking, already carrying the weight of a world too heavy for someone his age. Dawn rarely found him in bed. Instead, it found him walking on the busy street of the city every day, while he carried a bag of sachet water, his fragile tools for survival. His faded yellow t-shirt hung over his small frame. His shorts torn at one corner, but none of this stopped him from walking upright, chin raised with an odd mix of determination and humility. Albert was poor, painfully so, but he carried the kind of pride that could not be bought or destroyed. He never begged for himself. He hustled every day for his mother, Mary. His father left them when he was barely a month old. Mary lay on an old mattress inside their cramped room, a room made from patched wooden boards. The space was barely large enough for their mattress, a plastic bucket, and the kerosene lamp. Her once round cheeks were now sunken, her skin pale and stretched across her bones, her breaths shallow and painful. But she always smiled when Albert returned. "Did you eat something today?" she asked every single time. And Albert always lied. "Yes, Mama, I ate." But he didn't. He never ate until she did. Every coin he earned went toward her medication and food. He fetched water from the communal borehole every morning, sold sachet water in the afternoon, and carried loads for traders in the market. He had memorized every corner of the city because survival forced him to. He was young, but life had built him into something older, an old soul in a small body. His mother's sickness deepened day by day. The small medications the clinic gave them, cheap tablets that dissolved too fast, were no longer working. Albert noticed. He saw the fear she tried to hide. And he remembered the doctor's words. "Her kidney is failing. She needs surgery as soon as possible." A surgery whose cost sounded like a number only spoken in fairy tales, so large it makes Albert dizzy. He didn't tell her he had overheard the doctor. He didn't want her to see the fear that kept him awake at night. Some nights, when she slept, he whispered prayers into the darkness. "Please don't take her. She's all I have. Please, leave her for me." Sometimes, they both dozed off together while sitting and chatting. Mary, despite the pain, always whispered to him, "You are my strength, Albert. Don't ever forget that." Little did he know that life, cruel as it had been, was preparing to place him on a path he could never have imagined. A path filled with pain, miracles, and a destiny that had been waiting for him long before he was born. The sun was sinking behind the crowded buildings of the city. It was the busiest hour in the marketplace, the time when tired workers hurried home. Albert walked carefully, clutching a small loaf of bread tightly against his chest. It was the only thing he and his mother would share that night. Buying it had cost him the last few coins he had earned after selling a few sachets of water. As long as Mama ate, the day was a victory for him. He whispered to himself as he walked. "Just get home. Mama will be happy." The thought made him walk faster. But fate has a strange way of intervening, strange, sudden, and sometimes cruel. A loud, sharp screech ripped through the air. A car swerved violently. People screamed. And before Albert could blink, the car slammed into him from the side and drove off. It wasn't too serious, but he never saw it coming. His small body crashed down on the hard road. The loaf of bread lay bay on the ground next to him. Gasps burst from every direction. "Oh my God, the boy. Who hit him like that? Is a hit-and-run driver," one voice said. Vendors rushed forward, forming a circle around him. Albert tried to sit up, but pain shot up his thigh. He couldn't, and he cried. But it wasn't the pain that made his heart ache. It was the ruined loaf of bread. He stared at it, lying on the ground, destroyed. He had promised his mother. He had told her he would bring food. And now, this. The crowd murmured in pity, but no one stepped close enough to touch him, fear, hesitation, or uncertainty keeping them at a distance. Until a tall shadow moved through the people. A man stepped forward, sharp-featured, well-dressed, wearing quiet authority like a second skin. His name was Elias Oza, a wealthy businessman known throughout the city for his cold efficiency and distant demeanor. No one expected to see him in a crowded market. But destiny arranges meetings long before humans understand them. Elias pulled the broken boy up with a smile. "You're hurt," he said softly, his voice unexpectedly warm. Albert looked up. "I need to go home. Mama's waiting. She's sick." Elias shook his head gently. "You can't go home like this." Elias held his hand and walked through the stunned crowd. They walked together until they got to where his car was parked. He placed him inside his sleek black SUV, a place Albert felt too small and too dirty to be in. He drove off with him. Minutes later, he lay in a private hospital bed, his wounds cleaned and his leg tightly bandaged. But even surrounded by safety and comfort, Albert's mood was not bright when he woke up. Elias stood beside the bed. "Why are you sad? Does it still hurt?" Albert shook his head. "I didn't take food to Mama." Elias's breath caught. He stared at the small boy, at the purity of that fear and love. Something pressed painfully inside his chest. "What's her name?" Elias asked gently. "Mary," Albert whispered. Please take me home." "Okay, I will," Elias said. And that moment would become the hinge on which all their destinies would turn. Elias drove with him through the city until they entered the slum area. Albert expected Elias to frown at the winding, dusty roads, to question why they were going so far from the city center. But Elias said nothing as he drove. His grip tightened around the steering wheel each time Albert winced in pain. He didn't know why he cared so much, but something in the boy's trembling voice had pierced him deeply. "Just stop here, sir," Albert said. Elias parked the car and they stepped out. He walked with Albert through a narrow alley. Neighbors paused in silence. A wealthy man in a tailored suit in their hood, this was not a sight they saw every day. Albert pointed to a wooden shack structure leaning crookedly against another shack. "That one, that's my home." Elias approached it with measured steps. The moment they stepped inside, the sight struck him like a blow. Mary lay on a thin, worn mattress placed directly on the ground. The room smelled faintly of sickness and kerosene smoke. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath sounding like a battle she was losing. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps and she sat up. "Albert," she whispered, voice thin as paper. "Mama," Albert breathed, sitting beside her. "I'm sorry. I fell. I couldn't bring the bread. I tried. My baby, food can wait. You're hurt. Are you okay?" Her concern was genuine, yet she could barely hold her hand up without shaking. Elias stood silently, watching them. His throat tightened. He had seen poverty before. He had seen pain. But this quiet, tender love in the middle of suffering was something else entirely. Something that pulled at a place he had long buried. Mary finally noticed him. "Sir, thank you for bringing my son home," she whispered. "May heaven bless you." Elias stepped forward instinctively. "How long has this been happening?" he asked, voice tight. "A while," she said softly. But further said she's strong, that she will be okay. She tried to smile, but couldn't hold it. Elias crouched beside her. "Mary, listen. You need a hospital. Now." She shook her head weakly. "No, the bills. We can't. We owe so much already." Elias's voice hardened, not with anger, but with resolve. "I didn't ask if you could afford it." "But sir," Albert whispered, "the hospital is expensive. They won't treat her unless." Elias gently assured him. "They will. I'll make sure of it." He turned to Mary. "Pack a few things," Elias said softly but firmly. "We leave now." Albert acted fast. He carefully lifted a nylon bag and packed all they owned, few clothes and an old photo of Mary holding baby Albert. Elias assisted her out of the room himself. Neighbors emerged from their own shacks, whispering and staring. They watched, stunned, as a wealthy man in polished shoes led a dying woman through their dusty alleyway and placed her gently into a car that looked like it had no business being in such a place. As Elias drove them toward the hospital, Albert held his mother's hand in the back seat, whispering, "Mama, you will be okay." He had no idea that this moment, this act of mercy, was about to unravel a truth that would shake the very foundation of his life. Albert continued holding her hand tightly, whispering, "Mima, stay strong, please." Elias forced himself to focus on the road, though his heartbeat thundered in his chest. He had never driven this fast. He had never cared this urgently. And he had certainly never felt fear, real, sharp fear, for a stranger. But Mary wasn't a stranger anymore. Not to Albert. And for reasons he couldn't explain, not to him either. When they reached the hospital, nurses rushed forward at the sight of her pale skin and trembling limbs. Mary was rushed in the stretcher straight to the emergency ward. "She's in critical condition," one nurse said immediately. Albert ran after them, but a nurse gently stopped him. "Let us work, sweetheart. Go and sit with your guardian." Albert shook his head. "He's not my guardian." The boy stuttered, unsure what Elias truly was to him now. While the nurses and doctors took care of Mary. Her breaths came in weak, ragged gasps, each one sounding like it might be her last. Elias and Albert waited in the waiting room. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the head doctor stepped out with a grave expression. "She is severely dehydrated, malnourished, and her kidney failure has worsened rapidly. She needs immediate dialysis and then surgical intervention. Without it..." His voice trailed off. Albert's knees nearly buckled. "Tell me what she needs," Elias said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. The doctor continued, "Dialysis tonight. After that, surgery within the next 48 hours. But the surgery is expensive, very expensive, and we require upfront payment." He listed the cost. Albert gasped. Elias didn't. "I'll pay," he said simply. The doctor blinked. "Sir, it's a significant amount." "I heard you the first time," Elias replied, the calm in his voice carrying an authority that silenced all argument. "Do whatever you need to save her." As the doctor hurried away, Albert turned to Elias, eyes wide open. "Sir, why? Why are you helping us? You don't know us." Elias stood silently with the mask covering his mouth. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? A strange ache pulsed inside him, something old and buried, something he thought he had lost long ago. A deep longing he couldn't name. A familiarity in Mary's eyes he didn't know how to explain. So he answered with the only truth he was certain of. No child should watch a parent die when there is a chance to save them. Albert threw his arms around him, gripping him as though he had found the one safe place in the world. Elias stiffened. He had not been hugged in years, but slowly, awkwardly, he let his hand rest on the boy's back. Thank you," Albert whispered over and over. A nurse approached them. "We need to run identity verification for Ms. Mary," she said. "Just a routine check for surgery preparation." Elias nodded. "Will she be okay?" Albert asked again, desperate. "She's in the best place she could be," Elias said, forcing calm into his voice. "They will do everything they can." What he didn't say was that he was terrified not for himself, but for the boy whose entire world lay behind those hospital doors. They waited. Hours passed. Hospital beeps, nurses rushing, muffled voices, and the harsh smell of antiseptic filled the hallways, but all Albert felt was the overwhelming silence of waiting. He eventually fell asleep on the couch. As Elias sat patiently waiting for the report on the pre-surgical assessments, a nurse approached him, clutching a slim white folder against her chest. "Mr. Oza," she called gently. He looked up. Her expression made his stomach sink. "We ran routine identity checks as part of the surgical intake. And," she hesitated, "we found something unusual." "What is it?" Elias questioned. She glanced around, then spoke. "Her full name is Marianne Oza," she said. "Born the same year, same month, and same day as you." The world slowed. The noises in the waiting room faded. Even his heartbeat seemed to stall. That name. That surname. He swallowed hard, staring at the nurse with hand on his head thinking. Then she handed him the report. It was ordinary paper, but the truth it carried was not. Birth date. Hospital of birth. Mother's name. Father's name. His mother's name. His father's name. The exact same. Elias felt the room tilt. His throat tightened as he sat quietly. A memory, one he had buried so deep he forgot he had buried it, rose with painful clarity. His mother, lying in a hospital bed years ago, her voice weak, her breath short, whispering something he never wanted to believe. You had a sister, she didn't survive the fire. He had mourned. He had cried. He had lived with that loss. But what if, his pulse hammered, what if she had survived? What if she had been taken? What if someone sold her? Or gave her away? What if she lived a life he never knew of? Suffered alone? Grew up abandoned and broken while he became wealthy and comfortable? Guilt pierced him like a knife. Elias stood abruptly. Where is the doctor? He demanded, voice shaking. I want full DNA verification. Immediately. He paced the hallway with rapid steps. His mind was a turmoil of hope, fear, anger, confusion, emotions too big to contain. Could it be? After all these years? He remembered the fire. The chaos. The strangers who came afterward. The months he spent in a shelter until a relative took him in. But for his sister, no record, no trace. Just a grave with no body. A few days later he returned to the doctor's office for the DNA test results. Hours felt like years as he waited. And for the first time in his adult life, Elias prayed. Not for wealth. Not for success. But for truth. The hours crawled by like wounded soldiers as he sat in a quiet corner of the doctor's office, staring at the door as though they held the answers he desperately needed. Meanwhile, little Albert sat in the hallway waiting for him. He was exhausted from worry and fear. The hallway was quiet, interrupted only by the distant beeping of machines and the occasional hurried footsteps of nurses. But inside Elias's chest, a storm raged. What if this child's mother is my sister? What has her life been like? What did she endure? Where was I? Why didn't I know? Why wasn't I there for her? Questions without answers spiraled like a tornado. Then, finally, the doctor stepped in. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He had the expression of a man delivering news so significant he had to be careful with every word. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs. Mr. Oza, the doctor said quietly, the results are back. Elias inhaled deeply. His hands trembled slightly. Tell me, Elias whispered. The doctor hesitated. Not because he doubted the results, but because he understood the emotional weight of what he was about to say. Then, softly, but clearly, he delivered the truth. Sir, Mary is your biological twin. It felt like the world stopped. The room blurred. The sounds dimmed. For a moment, Elias forgot how to breathe. What? He whispered, barely audible. Your sister, the doctor repeated gently. Genetic markers are an exact match. The probability of error is virtually zero. Elias sat still. My sister. Alive. Every memory of the fire came crashing back like a waterfall breaking through a dam. He remembered clutching a small hand as the flames consumed the building. He remembered being pulled away by rescuers. He remembered being told that she hadn't made it. He had mourned her. Accepted her death. Buried the grief deep enough to continue living. But now he learned she had lived. Without him. In suffering. In poverty. With a child depending on her. Emotion crushed him, grief, relief, love, anger, and guilt. My sister, he whispered in awe. All this time, she was alive. The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder. Fate has brought her back to you, sir. And not by coincidence. Through her son. Through the accident, and through your kindness. Elias left the doctor's office and sat with Albert in the waiting room. The boy he met as a stranger, who had unknowingly brought a family back together. Thank you, he gently whispered to him with a breaking voice. You brought her home. When Albert blinked. Are you okay, sir? Who did I bring home? The child asked softly. Elias nodded, voice trembling. I'm more than okay, Albert. What did you find? Albert asked innocently. Elias took a deep breath. A part of my heart, my family. And for the first time in many years, he opened his heart freely because destiny had not just revealed a truth. It had restored a family long broken. A few hours later, the surgery took place. Mary lay on a hospital bed, pale but peaceful. Her breathing was shallow, but her face carried a softness that hadn't been there before. The softness of hope. The world returned to Mary slowly. Beside her bed stood her son, Albert. "Mama," he whispered, voice barely holding together. "You are awake." She inhaled gently, her first deep breath in days without pain slicing through her. Her lips trembled. "Albert," she breathed out weakly. "My brave boy," she whispered, lifting her head towards him. "You didn't give up on me." "I prayed every day," Albert said. "I was so scared, but Uncle Elias said you'd make it. He said you're strong." Mary blinked at the unfamiliar name. "Uncle Elias?" Before she could ask, Elias entered. The man who saved her life. Her breath caught. She stared at him, now alert despite her weakness. His face, his jawline, his eyes, something echoed her own reflection. Something mimicked her father's features. "You," she whispered. Why do you look like my father?" Elias swallowed, the words lodged in his throat. "Because," he said softly, voice breaking at the edges, "I'm your brother." Mary froze. Her body stiffened. The room seemed to tilt around her. "No," she whispered. "No, my brother died in a fire, when we were children." Elias shook his head slowly, eyes filling with the ache of a lifetime of loss. "You didn't die either," he whispered. "You survived. You were taken away. Taken to another region. Someone separated us. You were adopted, and then abandoned." "My brother," she choked out. "Elias." He nodded. And that single gesture shattered her. For the first time since childhood, the siblings felt whole. For the first time in decades, they weren't alone. "I thought I lost you," she said. "I thought you were dead," he whispered back. "I lived my whole life alone, thinking I had no one. And now you're here." Albert stood beside them, watching the impossible unfold, his mother, sister to a man who suddenly felt like family to him too. The miracle felt almost unreal, like something written in the stars long before any of them understood their stories. After a long embrace, Mary pulled back. How did you find me?" Elias exhaled slowly. "I didn't find you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Your son did." Albert's eyes widened. Mary looked at her boy and whispered, "You saved me, and you brought me back to my family." And now, everything had changed. Few days after her surgery, the doctor gave Mary permission to leave the hospital as long as she stayed somewhere comfortable, clean, and highly conducive to recovery. When Elias heard that, he didn't hesitate. He hugged her. "You're coming home with me," he said gently. Mary blinked in bewilderment. "Home? Elias. I don't want to burden you. You've done so much already." "You're not a burden," he said firmly, voice nearly cracking. "You're my sister." When they reached Elias' mansion, Albert froze as they walked towards the entrance door. The house rose like a palace carved out of sunlight and stone. Tall pillars. Massive glass windows. Clean marble floors that reflected the chandeliers hanging high above. Everything smelled fresh, polished, rich. Mary herself was stunned too. The last time she lived in a place so grand was as a child, before the fire, before being separated and before her life was rewritten. Walking into Elias' home felt like stepping back into a life stolen from her. Elias watched them quietly, and guided them through the compound. Inside, the living room looked bigger than the entire street they once lived on. "You'll stay here," he said softly to Albert. "Thank you, Uncle. So I will live in this big house." He turned to Mary. "This is your home now. For as long as you want. Forever, if that's your wish." Mary was overwhelmed. "Elias. I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," he whispered. "If I had known you were alive, if I had known you were suffering, I would have looked for you. I would have never stopped. You found me now," she whispered. "And that's enough." As days passed, Albert's appearance changed completely and he always played games on his new phone. The mansion transformed with laughter, returning to the home that had been silent for years. Albert explored every corner of the house with the excitement of a child discovering a new world, marble staircases, big room for himself. Elias often watched him from a distance, smiling faintly, marveling at how natural it felt to have the boy running through home that once echoed empty. Months passed like pages turning in a quiet book, each one softer, lighter, filled with a healing none of them had expected. What began as a rescue had grown into something deeper, something Elias had no words for, something Mary felt in every careful breath, and something Albert embraced with all the innocence of a child finally allowed to rest. Elias had never imagined himself part of a family again. For years, he had walked through life with a hollow space inside him, a void he hid behind his success, his calmness, his relentless work. He was known in the business world for his brilliance, in communities for his generosity, but no one knew that when he returned home, his laughter echoed in empty rooms and died quickly in the silence. But now, everything was different. He had found Mary, his sister, alive. He had found a nephew who clung to him with trust unearned but deeply cherished. He had found purpose outside his business. And with every day that passed, the emptiness inside him retreated like a tide going out with the dawn. He became a constant presence in Albert's life. Albert went back to school and attended one of the prestigious schools in the area, and soaked up every moment and every lesson. He had never had a father figure, and Elias had never had a child to love. Somehow, without planning or expecting it, they filled each other's missing pieces. One evening, Albert with thoughtful eyes said, "Uncle Elias, thank you for saving Mama." The words struck Elias deeper than he expected. For a moment he didn't speak. He simply looked at the boy, this brave, fragile child who had carried more weight than many adults ever would. He gently said, "You saved her first, Albert," he said quietly. "You never gave up on her. You never left her side." Albert's eyes softened. "And thank you," Elias whispered back to him, emotion catching in his throat, "for finding me too." It was true. Albert had found something inside him that had been lost for decades: hope, connection, the ache of belonging. He didn't know the exact moment it happened, but he knew that from the first time. As Mary sat with Elias and Albert chatting, she felt whole for the first time in years. They all did. Redemption had not arrived with fanfare. It had come slowly, gently, through healing wounds, shared meals, laughter in small doses, and love growing quietly between the three of them. And though none of them spoke it aloud, they all felt the same thing. This was the beginning of something beautiful. And together, they stepped forward. Back into the world. Back into hope. Back into the life they were always meant to share. The circle of their story, broken for decades, had finally closed. Life had dealt them all heavy blows. Elias had grown up believing his sister died in a fire. Mary had grown up never knowing she belonged to someone. And Albert had grown up too soon, carrying burdens no child should ever bear. Yet here they were, bound together not by circumstance, but by singular act of kindness. Mary had lived years in shadows, poverty, illness, fear, but now she had stepped into a world she once believed was closed to her. A world where she was safe. A world where she was loved. A world where she finally had a place. Her greatest joy, however, was watching Albert flourish. Albert had transformed. From a child who begged for scraps, he became a boy filled with dreams. From a boy used to sleeping on cold floors, he now slept in a warm room filled with books, toys, and light. From a son who lived in fear of losing his mother, he became a boy whose heart was full and secure. He adored Elias, following him around the house, asking endless questions about life and the world. Their bond had grown so naturally that it was hard to imagine a time when they had been strangers. Elias, too, had changed. His smiles came easier. His laughter was no longer rare or hollow. He felt whole. Not because he had found success, but because he had found the missing pieces of his heart. And so, their story lived on, not in tragedy, but in hope. Not in loss, but in restoration. Not in darkness, but in the radiant, undeniable light of a family reborn. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment of compassion to awaken a miracle. One act of kindness, one decision to help a stranger, rewrote their destiny. Elias gained a sister. Mary gained life. Albert gained a future. And the world gained a reminder. Small acts of love can awaken miracles buried deep beneath years of suffering. What do you think about this story? Please share your thoughts in the comment section. I would love to read from you. Thanks for watching. Remain blessed.